Who are the real biblical Israelites? And today we're going to be looking at history to prove who the real biblical Israelites are today. And I must warn you, and I must preface this video and say that this video will be graphic and painful to watch in some areas. So be very aware of that and be ready for all of the graphic things that you are about to see and some of the painful things that you are about to see and things that may be painful to your eyes to watch, but the truth will be revealed to you today. Before we get into the video, we're going to first review part 1, and I'm going to leave the link below if you have not yet seen part 1, and I highly recommend you do see part 1 of Who Are the Real Biblical Israelites so you can get a better understanding of who the real biblical Israelites were and how they were depicted back then. But today we're going to be reviewing a little bit more of that, and we're going to be tackling more of history to see who the real biblical Israelites are today. Because in order for any group of people to claim or consider themselves to be the real chosen of our Father Yahuwah, they must first fit, match, and adhere to all of the curses that are written and spoken of in Scripture itself, primarily the Torah, and most notably by Ikra or Leviticus chapter 26 verses 14 to 46, as well as Deuteronomy or Dabarim chapter 28 verses 15 through 68. And only one group of people fit that description. And so the question we will also be tackling today, just as we did in part 1, is the Israel that we see today, is the 1948 Israel, does that Israel fit and match Scripture? Or is this Israel a fraudulent fake, and are they hiding the real Israel from you? Because if so, then there is a huge lie that has been perpetrated in the world. And like I said, in order for this Israel, the 1948 Israel, to fit and match the description that is described in Scripture, they must first adhere to all of the curses that are spoken of in the Torah. And so the question is, does this group of people, do the Jewish people today, do they fit and match what Scripture itself is talking about? That and more to come as we tackle this, and so you can see the real biblical Israelites. Now, I would also like to preface this and say, too, that does this only mean that this one group of people will inherit the kingdom that is spoken of in Scripture? Does this one group of people, will they be the only group of people to inherit the kingdom? No, they will not. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, brown, yellow, green, blue, red, purple, pink, orange. It does not matter your skin color as long as you're following the laws, statutes, and commandments and the righteous laws of our Father Yahuwah. You will inherit the kingdom. It does not matter what color you are. I do not preach or say that white people are the devil, nor do I preach or teach that Esau is the white man. I do not preach or teach that doctrine anywhere on my channel, and nowhere on my channel will you find myself saying that I do not promote that hate doctrine whatsoever. However, we do need to be clear, and we do need to understand who the real biblical Israelites are, and we need to see the truth behind who the real biblical Israelites are and who that one group of people specifically is talking about when Scripture is specifically talking about this one group of people, most notably in Leviticus chapter 26 and Deuteronomy chapter 28. And the question we have for today is this group of people referring to the Jewish people that we see that was formed in the 1948 Israel, or is this another group of people? That is the simple question that we are answering for today. And that is the question that we were also pondering in part 1 as well. So now that we are all on the same page, and now that we know the intent of this video, and now that we know what the video is really about, and that it's not about preaching hate doctrine, now we can see and uncover the truth for what it really is, because the truth will be revealed to you today. And so now we're going to review everything that we learned and uncovered in part 1. 1, and we're going to go over this once again so we can see who the real biblical Israelites were and are and how they were depicted back then, because I'm showing you ancient Russian icons of certain prophets that were depicted, and these icons were depicted all the way back into the 17th, 18th centuries and even earlier before that. And as you can see, they depict ones of the biblical prophets and the ancient biblical prophets that are spoken of in scripture, ones including Musha or Moses, Aharun, who is also known as Aaron, Malach Shaluma, who is also known as King Solomon, biblical prophets including Ezekiel or Yakazkal, as well as Daniel or Daniel, and as you can see on the left is depicted as Ezekiel and on the right is depicted as Daniel. Zachariahu, who is also known as Zechariah, Husha, who is commonly known to the world as Hosea, and finally the Messiah himself, who is known commonly to the world as Jesus, but his real Hebrew name is actually Yahusha. In fact, there are many Russian icons that are depicting our Messiah, Yahusha, and we know this is him because we see these Greek symbols in these pictures, and if you see my Mark of the Beast video, you know exactly what this symbol is, and you also know what this hand gesture represents, but you can see in these Russian icons that Yahusha is depicted with dark black skin. And there are also Russian icons depicted of our Messiah Yahusha with his mother Mary, also known as Miriam in the Hebrew. Not to mention Russian icons of our Messiah Yahusha depicted with the Talmidim, who is also commonly known as the disciples as well. In Who Are the Real Biblical Israelites Part 1, we also talked about all of the scriptures that even describe some of our prophets and even describe our father Yahuwah and the Mashiach Yahusha. And so we're briefly going to go over it once again because we're here in Bereshith or Genesis chapter 2, and today we're going to be using the original 1611 KJV Bible, where you will not find the letter J in it whatsoever. But let's keep going, because when you go to verses 7 in this version, it even says, and because this is a truth network, we use the restored set apart Hebrew names for our father Yahuwah and his son Yahusha. And it says, and Yahuwah Elohim, another way to pronounce Elohim is Elohim, formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And of course, this is talking about how our father Yahuwah created man, also known as Adam. Well, it even says that what breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, man became a living soul, and he formed man of the dust of the ground. What color is dust? Because we're even here in Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah chapter 14, and we're going to be reading from verses 2 that even says that Yahudah or Judah mourneth, and the gates thereof languish, they are black unto the ground, and the cry of Yerushalayim or Jerusalem is gone up. And notice how you do not see a letter J there whatsoever. Oh, so they are black unto the ground. What color are they? But we even see it in Lamentations chapter 4 verses 8, where it even says their visage is blacker than a coal, they are not known in the streets, their skin cleaveth to their bones, it is withered, it is become like stick. And you can find this also in the regular King James Version as well. But we even see proof of who the real biblical Israelites were in Lamentations chapter 5 verses 10, where it says our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. And that's not the only place, because we're even here in Song of Shaluma or Song of Solomon chapter 1 verses 5 through 6, where it says I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Yerushalayim or Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Shaluma or Solomon. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me, they made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. But we even see it in Yashub or Job chapter 30 verses 30 that even says, my skin is black upon me and my bones are burnt with heat. Oh, but that's not the only place, because we even see it in the visions of Daniel or Daniel, and we're here in Daniel chapter 7 verses 9, which even describes how our Father looks from the vision that Daniel had. And it even says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the flame of fire, and his wheels as burning fire. So it even describes our Father, or the Ancient of Days, having hair of wool. And that's not the only description that we see that, because we even see it in Daniel or Daniel chapter 10 verses 6, when Daniel has another vision of the Mashiach Yahusha himself, where he even says that his body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Well, when you look at the color of polished brass, you get a very dark color. And guess what? Daniel is not the only prophet to have that vision, because even Yahuchanan or John also had a similar vision of the Mashiach Yahusha in Hazun or Revelation chapter 1 verses 13 through 15, which even says, and in the midst of the seven candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with the garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with the golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his feet were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they were burned in a furnace, and his voice is the sound of many waters. So here we see that description, that his head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, which is very dark skin. Only one group of people fits that description quite well. Another place that depicts the people of Yashrael or Israel quite well is Ofseen or Acts chapter 13 verses 1, that even says, now there were in the assembly or church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul or Shaul. Now why did I leave that highlighted in Simeon that was called Niger? Because when you pronounce that word in the Greek, when you pronounce this word in the Greek, you get the pronunciation Niger. Where else have I heard that word before? I even went over with you and proved to you with pictures themselves to show you how the fake Khazarian Jews, how they were the ones who not only painted over the real biblical pictures from black to white, from this to this, and I even told you and showed you how they are in fact the synagogues of Satan, as even scripture proves it in Revelation or Hazun chapter 2 verses 9 and Revelation chapter 3 verses 9, where they say they are Jews. They claim to be the Yahudim, but they are in fact not, because they do in fact lie, and they've been lying for how many years? I cannot be anti-Semitic, because those who claim to be Semitic and those who are calling themselves Semitic are not even Semitic, and what you are about to witness is the biggest form of anti-Semitism that has been going on in the world for hundreds and hundreds of years today, and I'm going to prove that to you in just a second, so you can see the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but so that you can also see who the real biblical Israelites are today. Because those who are claiming to be the chosen and those who are claiming to be the real biblical Israelites who are in Israel right now, which is fraudulent by the way, and I'm going to prove that, but those who are claiming themselves to be the chosen are actually originators of the Khazarian kingdom in the early 10th century, which was a kingdom that originated in Western Russia and present day Western Russia from AD 7th to 10th centuries. And what they did is that they converted to the Hebrew culture culture and the Hebrew heritage. They learned the Torah and they stole from the Torah, as well as painted over the biblical pictures hundreds of years later from black to white. And then they, of course, masqueraded themselves around claiming to be the chosen when they are in fact not. And not only did they do that, but they also faked the Holocaust. Yes, you heard me. They faked the Holocaust, also known as the Holla-hoax, in order to get the world to believe such a lie that they are the chosen when they are in fact not. Because even the past Egyptian president named Gamal Abdel Nasser has even made a statement even saying that the real Jews, they left black and came back white, and that the present fake Khazarian Jews would not find any rest in that land because they are not the real chosen. And that is exactly what has happened, and we actually see that because ever since 1948 Israel, there has been nothing but war in the Middle East. I wonder why that's the case. Even Adolf Hitler, the man who is said to be responsible for the genocide of millions and millions of people, even though this is not true, has actually made the statement that the real chosen and that the real biblical Israelites and the real Jews are in fact the so-called Negroes that are in America. Even Mr. Hitler himself made such a statement. So then who are the ones who are masquerading themselves as the chosen when the curses spoken of in Scripture, primarily the Torah, do not even fit these group of people? Who are these people who are claiming to be the real chosen? Has there been an identity theft? Of course there has, because after they faked the Holocaust, what the Zionists then had to do in order to gain control of the world, what they had to do was convince the world that they were the chosen by faking the Holocaust and by faking Anne Frank, which we're going to go over in just a second. And in order for the world to believe a massive lie, which it is because they do lie, because they are the synagogues of Satan, they had to in fact create their fraudulent nation of Israel, courtesy the United Nations, back on May 14th, 1948. And this lie has been going on for 68 years too long, because you're going to witness what real anti-Semitism really is and what's been going on, and the real anti-Semitism that has been going on for over 400 years now. And the reason you will not learn about the kingdom of Khazaria in your textbooks, and the reason you will not find the kingdom of Khazaria in a history book, is because all of the history books and textbooks are Zionist funded, so then they made sure to hide this information so that you will not know the truth, and so that you will not know the origin of the real fake Jews, which are the Khazarian Jews, which originate from present-day Russia. They are not Semitic whatsoever. But if you do not believe me, maybe you will believe an article that was published by the Oxford Journal from geneticist Dr. Eran Al-Haik, who is Israeli, by the way, because even in this article he published the missing link of Jewish European ancestry, contrasting the Rhineland and the Khazarian hypotheses. And like I said, this comes from geneticist Dr. Eran Al-Haik of the Department of Mental Health, Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, from the McCusick Nathans Institute of Genetic Medicine, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and this was published in Genome Biology and Evolution. And what he found and what his conclusions are is that genetically and scientifically proven that those who are from Jewish descent and those who claim to be of Jewish descent, that their heritage traces all the way back to the kingdom of Khazaria, the Ashkenazi Jews, which was a kingdom that was found in Western Russia, nowhere near the land of Israel and nowhere near the land of Palestine, nowhere near Semitic speaking lands and places. What he also concluded is that the Khazars, which are the Jewish ancestors, were Slavic, Scythian, Bulgarian, Iranian, and Turkish tribes and peoples who converted to the Hebrew heritage and then subsequently formed their own religion called Judaism in the 8th century AD. And as you can see here from a map from his study, you see that this is the Judeo-Khazarian Jewish kingdom, and this is the extent of Khazaria in the 5th through the 13th centuries AD. And as you can see how it spread all throughout the rest of Europe and even all throughout the Middle East as well. Dr. Iran Al-Haik also goes further to ascertain and to prove genetic studies that even show genetic similarity between the European Jews as well as peoples from the Caucasus regions that lived in inhabited regions that are in present-day Russia. He also concludes, historically speaking, how these Khazars not only converted to Judaism in history itself, but he also concludes the fall of Khazaria and how hundreds of thousands of Judeized Khazars immigrated eastward and immigrated all throughout Europe and the Middle East, and even some places in Africa, as well as the proselytizing movement. And we also know, historically speaking, that the fake Jews, that those who call themselves the real chosen but are not, but do lie, we also know that historically speaking that they have been booted and kicked out of over 100 nations throughout history because of their lies. And for those of you who think that this is anti-Semitic, it is impossible for me to be anti-Semitic right now, because I've just even proven to you genetically and scientifically speaking and historically speaking that those who claim to be Semitic are not Semitic whatsoever, nor do they come from any region that is near Semitic regions, but that it is really anti-Semitic to beat, kill, rape, torture, slaughter, enslave, maim, and brutalize the real biblical Israelites, and then go and steal their identity, culture, and heritage from them, and then lie about it to the rest of the world, and then create a fake fraudulent nation in order to get the world to believe such a lie, and then fake the Holocaust in order to make the world believe such a wicked and perverse lie. But yet this lie has been going on for so many years. And real anti-Semitism has been perpetrated against the world in what is known as the biggest deception of all time. Don't believe me? You will after this. But Dr. Iran Al-Haik is not the only one who asserts this and proves this, because many other journalists and scholars also approve this and assert the same thing, because even Hungarian-born author and journalist Arthur Koestler, who is of Jewish descent by the way, also comes to the conclusion in his 1976 controversial book known as The 13th Tribe, concludes that Ashkenazi Jews are not descendants of the historical biblical Israelites, but are in fact the Khazars, who originate from the Khazarian kingdom, which is of Western Russia. And also Barashith in Genesis chapter 10 verses 3 also proves this, because it even shows and tells you that Ashkenaz was of Japheth and not Shem. Therefore, those who are calling themselves the Jewish or the Khazars, they are not Shemitic, and they are not from the line of Shem, but rather from the line of Japheth, so therefore they are not Semitic. But Arthur Koestler is not the only one either, because even Austrian-born Israeli professor of Tel Aviv University Shlomo San, in his controversial 2008 book known as The Invention of Jewish People, also asserts the same thing. And by the way, this man was born to Jewish parents. Now, Shlomo San also argues and asserts that the ancestry of the Jewish people come from Khazarian converts who did not want to convert to neither Christianity nor Islam during the Roman Catholic Church-led religious wars during the 6th through the 10th centuries AD. He is also against Jewish essentialism, and he does not support the fraudulent 1948 Israel, and he also asserts that they have no right to that land, which they do not. And of course, they are not the only ones, because there are many more scholars and historians and Jewish people themselves who are even saying and asserting and proving that they are not the descendants of the real biblical Israelites, but where they really come from, which is Khazaria and the Khazarian kingdom. And they're not the only ones, because truth is coming out today, and the truth is coming to light, because here I am at The Guardian from an article that was dated back on June 24th, 2016, that even says, man who claimed to have escaped Auschwitz admits he lied for years. Joseph Hertz said he fabricated story of being sent to camp and meeting Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele to keep memories alive about the history of the Holocaust, or as I call it, the Holohoax. And what you will find is that he is not the only one who has lied about the Holocaust, or should I say the Holohoax, because they do lie, because they are the synagogues of Satan, and and the truth is finally coming to light today. And you're even hearing about camps such as Auschwitz and many other so-called concentration camps that are readjusting their numbers because the 6 million mark is nowhere to be found at all, which even proves that the Holocaust is in fact a hoax. And we're going to go over the real Holocaust that has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years to the real biblical Israelites in just a second. But before we do, I'm here showing you actual statistics from the World Almanac, and as you can see, this is the estimate for Jews in the above table from 1933 that was done by the American Jewish Committee. And as you can see, the total amount of them in 1933 was 15.3 million approximately. And the World Almanac for the statistic in 1933 was taken from page 419. But now I'm also showing you the Jewish population as of 1938, and this is from the World Almanac page 510, also from the American Jewish Committee and the Jewish Statistical Bureau of the Synagogue Council of America. And as you can see, the total was 15.7 million in 1938. And if you look at the World Almanac from page 289, what you will find is the Jewish population from the year 1948, which was after World War II, well after World War II, should I say, and you will see that the total number of Jews amounts to 15.753 million Jews that were around in 1948. So between the years 1938 and 1948, the Jewish population actually increased 50,000. You even see that, and this is not according to me. This is according to the documentations itself. This is according to the World Almanac itself. So where is the 6 million figure? The answer is that there is none because it didn't exist, because it did not really happen, because it's a hoax. And you're probably wondering why I'm showing you a picture of the cover of Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, because I'm sure many of us have had to read this book in school and maybe even outside of school, is because what if I told you is that it was made up, it's hoax, and it's a forged book. It did not really happen. There was no Diary of Anne Frank. Scholar and Holocaust denier Mr. David Irving posts on his website an article that was dated from the New York Post on October 9, 1980 by Al Fredericks, which says Anne Frank may have not inked that famous diary. A report by the German Federal Criminal Investigation Bureau, or BKA, indicates that portions of the diary of Anne Frank had been altered or added after 1951, casting doubt over the authenticity of the entire work, the West German news weekly Der Spiegel has disclosed. The article goes on to talk about how there have been results of tests performed at the BKA laboratories that even showed that portions of the work, especially in the 4th volume, were written with the ballpoint pen. Well, the problem with this is that ballpoint pens were not available before 1951, and the BKA concluded that sections must have been added subsequently after Anne Frank was even there. And by the way, Anne Frank did not die because of a gas chamber. She died of typhus along with many other children during World War II because there were no gas chambers. Hitler never mandated gas chambers. You will not find that in any of Nazi documents. You will not find that in any of the writings from Hitler or Stalin or Churchill regarding any plans for extermination and exterminating the Jews with gas chambers. That was not there. You will not find it. But what you will find is plans of immigration to kick the so-called Jews out of Germany and to bring them into Madagascar. That was the original plan, but because of the Balfour Declaration back in 1917, well, it was mandated that these fake Jews would then find a home in Palestine after being kicked out of Germany. But what they had to do was fake the Holocaust in order to do that, and then tug at the hearts of the world strings by making these fraudulent books such as the Diary of Anne Frank. Because even a New York Times article dated back from June 8th of 1989 also questions the authenticity of the Diary of Anne Frank, and has even named her father, Otto Frank, as co-author in a copyright move from an edition of the New York Times that was published back on November 13th, 2015. But they're telling you some truth, because Time magazine also comes out with an edition on this dated back from November 15th, 2015, it even says Anne Frank's diary now has a co-author to extend the copyright. But what is the real truth about Anne Frank? Here I am from a case that was taken from the Supreme Court of New York special term of the New York County as of March 12, 1957. And the reason this case is so important is because in this case, Otto Frank, the father of Anne Frank, and former friend or author Meyer Levin concluded that they both conspired to write the book and lied to the entire world, and Meyer Levin was awarded $50,000 for his work in part of deceiving the entire world. And there have been many professors and Holocaust deniers who have said the exact same thing, because even Professor Arthur Butts of Northwestern University, also known as the author of The Hoax of the 20th Century, has even said, quote, "I have looked over the diary and don't believe its authenticity." And he's not the only one, because also Professor Robert Farrison, a Holocaust denier and author of Is the Diary of Anne Frank Genuine, has even concluded and said the same things, and there are many more as well. So now that we know who the real biblical Israelites are not, and we've just proven that those who claim to be the real biblical Israelites are not the real biblical Israelites, but that they do lie, and I've just proven that to you forensically, historically, scientifically, academically, and scripturally, what you are about to witness is the biggest type of anti-Semitism that has been going on and perpetrated in the world, the biggest deception of all time. Truth being revealed to you today. Because even Psalms or Tehillim chapter 68 verses 4 says that we are to sing praises to the name of our Father Yah and extol his name Yah or Yahuwah. So we are to sing praises to his name. But did you know that many of the biblical prophets and forefathers had the name of Yah or Yahu in their names? Because yes, the Hebrew is important, names are important, but what the Khazars have done is they've done a great job hiding this information from you, and by identity theft and everything else and all of their lies that continue to be perpetrated against the world. Because 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verses 14 even says, our Father Yahuwah says that if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. When you look at the Hebrew names of the prophets that are mentioned in scripture, you will see that yes, they have Yah or Yahu in their names, and they have specific meanings to them. So for example, Isaiah, his real name is Yashayahu, which means salvation is Yahuwah. Jeremiah, or his real name is Yarm Yahu, which is the resurrection or rising is Yahuwah, and the list goes on and on. Zephaniah, his real name is Safan Yahu, which means the secret is Yahuwah. Zechariah or Zakaryahu, which means Yahuwah remembers. And we also have Nehemiah, or his real name is Naham Yahu, which means consoled by Yahuwah. And Matthew, his real name is Matith Yahu, which is the gift is Yahuwah. So we see that all of the prophets were called by the name of the Father and had the name of the Father in their names. But it's not just the prophets, because the real biblical Israelites also had the name of our Father Yah and Yahu in their names. Don't believe me? Let's find out. Here I am at slavevoyages.org, and this is the transatlantic slave trade database. And the reason that I'm here is because this was done by the Emory University, and what this is that this gives a comprehensive list of all of the so-called slaves who went into bondage and who went into slavery, and it gives even records of these slaves. But what's very interesting about this is when you type in the so-called African name Yah, as I have done right here, as you can see, this is what you get. And you see some of the names of the so-called slaves who were on these ships, and you can even see their ID as well as the ship name, when they arrived and where they embarked and disembarked. And as you can see, there are 822 results that pop up for Yah or Yahuwah, which is the shortened version of the name of our our Father because they come in the name of our Father who are called by his name. And you can see some of the names right here like Yaku and Yama and Yanoya, and the list goes on and on. And we know that these slaves are in fact the people who are spoken of in scripture, because we even know that based on Deuteronomy 28. Now here you're looking at a map from Slave Voyages that shows you the map of the different routes that these slave ships took and the routes that they went in and the direction that they went in. Because during the slave trade, scholars have estimated that there were approximately 12.5 million Hebrew slaves who were shipped to the New World on the transatlantic slave trade from about 1525 to 1866. In fact, children comprised 1/4 or more of these slave ship cargoes, and there were more slaves who came to America in the second Middle Passage than in the first, according to Walter Johnson's Soul by Soul, Life Inside the Antebellum Slave Market. And according to the University of California's report on slavery done back in March of 2003, the United States went from having 6% of slaves imported to more than 50% as of 1860. But it was not just the transatlantic slave trade either, oh no, because it was also the Arab slave trade as well. In fact, many historians estimate that between 650 and 1900 AD, approximately 10 to 20 million Hebrew people were enslaved by Arab slave traders. In fact, by Dr. John Alambella Azuma from the book The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa, published back in 2001, he estimates that over 80 million Hebrews died en route during this slave trade. And this map is courtesy the Atlas of the Transatlantic Slave Trade by David Eltis and David Richardson. Here are more scholarly estimations of the transatlantic slave trade from the period 1500 all the way up until 1875. And as you can see, the bulk of slavery that took place was in the mid 1600s all the way until the end of the 1800s. And as you can see, many of the slaves that were taken to places such as Spain and Uruguay, Portugal and Brazil, Great Britain, the Netherlands, the United States, France, Denmark, and the Baltic. And the totals, as you can see on the bottom right, total to about 12.5 million between the years 1500 and 1875. But how do we know for sure that these are the people who are the real biblical Israelites? How do we know that the people who were placed on those slave ships back then were in fact the people that scripture is in fact talking about? We know for many reasons actually, and we know because of the curses that are spoken of in Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 28, where it talks about the real biblical Israelites will be placed back again with ships into Egypt. But we also even know in scripture, because the real Messiah, Yahusha, told the Yahudim or the Hebrew Jews to flee into the mountains of Judea, and those mountains are actually Africa, as spoken of in Matthew or Matthew chapter 24, in order to avoid Roman rule and Roman captivity. Well, when they fled from Jerusalem, they went into Africa, and they fled to Africa, and then they migrated westward and settled into present-day Western Africa. And the map that you're currently looking at is actually a map from the book titled Hebrewisms of West Africa by Joseph J. Williams. During and after the Roman occupation of Jerusalem in 70 AD, millions of Hebrews fled into Africa and settled into what's now known as Western and Central Africa. And many of them settled into places what is now known as present-day countries such as Liberia, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Congo, Cameroon, Gabon, Ghana, Benin, Togo, along with many others. And from here, many of the Hebrew Israelites who adopted Bantu-speaking languages have then fled into more Bantu-speaking regions such as the Congo, Tanzania, Mozambique, and even Kenya as well. And as you can see, here's a map that is sourced from the Nystrom Atlas of World History. And this map is also found in the Encyclopedia of the Peoples of Africa and the Middle East. And as you can see, this is the Bantu migrations from 500 BC see, all the way to 1000 AD. So as you can see, the real biblical Israelites that are spoken of in scripture migrated all the way from coast to coast in Africa. Forensics also prove this to be a fact because the areas that are shaded in blue on this map, as you can see here, are the distribution of the haplogroup known as E1B1A for DNA, conducted back in 2007, which gives an indication of those who have Hebrew and Israelite heritage. And as you can see, in the darker shaded areas are those who are of peoples who descend from the real biblical Israelites, as you can see in regions such as Western Africa, as well as regions in Southwestern Africa such as Nigeria and Benin and Togo and Ghana, as well as Southeastern Africa too, with Mozambique and Zambia and some of South Africa, as well as Zimbabwe. In fact, scholars agree and contend with the fact that all of the Hebrew Israelites were in fact kicked out of their homeland Israel during the Roman rule and the Roman occupation of 70 AD, and were dispersed out of their homelands and taken into Roman captivity for those who did not escape Roman rule. And in fact, another scholar and historian that also agrees with this is a man by the name of Rudolph R. Windsor in his book From Babylon to Timbuktu. And in fact, on page 84, he even says, quote, "During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish Hebrew slaves," unquote. But then you're probably wondering, well, weren't Africans the ones enslaved and not the real biblical Israelites? Wasn't it Africans who were enslaved? And weren't the people on the slave ships, weren't they in fact African? The answer to that question is no, they were not African, and no, Africans were not enslaving Africans, because there is a difference between Hamites, who are the descendants of Ham, and the descendants of Shem, who are the so-called Negroes, who are the Hebrew people, which are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are the real biblical Israelites. Dictionaries will also tell you that Shemites are in fact Semites, and historians, scholars, and educators alike will also tell you the same thing. In fact, the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary also even tells you too, because if you look at page 213, you will see that the definition of Ham is actually as follows, quote, it says, "He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites." You can also read more about this in Bereshith, or Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20, but if you also look up the definition of Shem in pages 544 to 545, it will tell you that Shem is the progenitor of the Semitic race. So back then, during the biblical times, the Africans were comprised of the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites, but not the Negroes, because Negroes are not African, but rather they are descendants of Shem, not descendants of Ham. So therefore, they are the real Shemites, and we know this to be a fact because these are the people who were in fact enslaved on slave ships. And no, Africans were not enslaving other Africans, because Africans were not enslaving their own people. It would not make sense for them to enslave their own people. They were actually selling the real biblical Israelites into slavery, because they are not the same, and you can even prove this with forensics and scientific medical evidence as well. This also means that the descendants of Shem, who are commonly known as African Americans today, are in fact not African. Yes, the descendants of the Bible are not Africans, but rather they are the Israelites. They are a group of Hebrew people. In fact, we also know that history proves this as well, because here I am showing you a 1729 map entitled Negro Land in Guinea by geographer Herman Mall. And as you can see, back then, Negro land comprised of all the land such as Mali, Mauritania, and many other places around the same places that the slave trade happened within the transatlantic routes. Very interesting and suspicious indeed. In fact, even the 1902 Encyclopedia Britannica also mentions Negro land and even mentions some of the cities and inhabitants that lived and embarked in Negro land during the time. Before the occupation of Hebrew peoples and Bantu-speaking regions in present-day Western Africa and Central Africa, many of these Hebrew people were in fact kings and princes and queens and princesses in their own lands, and they had their own lands and inhabited their own lands peacefully before they were taken into slavery. In fact, many of their kingdoms based on ancient maps and ancient cartography even proves that they were in fact descendants of the biblical Israelites and descendants of the kingdom and house of Judah, as we see right here in an ancient map of southwestern Africa, because right here you can even see the kingdom of Judah. But we know it was not just the Bantu peoples of Africa who experienced slavery courtesy the transatlantic slave trade. We know that the real biblical Israelites were scattered across the entire four corners of the earth, even as early as Assyrian captivity back in the 700s AD. And right now, we're going to be talking more about the Arab slave trade, because this slave trade is often ignored in history. While many Hebrew people of the scriptures also fled westward, there were many who also fled eastward into present-day Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, along with many other places, not to mention even places as eastward as the Pacific Islands. But during the Arab slave trade, that is when they were taken into places such as India and all across the Middle East. During the Arab slave trade, black people were secured by a log or a branch around their necks in order to keep them secure from moving, and that is how the Arab slave masters were able to contain them, as you can see in a picture right here. In fact, what is often always undocumented during the Arab slave trade is the castration of male slaves, when black boys ages 8 through 12 had their penises and their scrotums completely amputated in order to prevent them from reproducing, Operation Depopulation, and they were castrated to be eunuchs in domestic service to the Arabs. In fact, author Ronald Siegel, in his book Islam's Black Slaves, the Other Black Diaspora, even talks about how at the beginning of the 10th century AD, 7,000 black eunuchs and 4,000 white eunuchs remained in the palace of the Caliph. Because this was the longest slave trade that began in 700 AD, with some scholars noting and arguing that the Arab slave trade lasting all the way until the 1960s, with slavery still occurring in the Arab world today in places such as Mauritania and Saudi Arabia, it's no surprise that the religious wars also had something to do with this, because during the religious wars, Arab forced Hebrew slaves to convert to Islam and follow the Quran, or else they had to be killed and removed to slave chambers. As you can see, here's a monument and display of Hebrew slaves that are documented in Zanzibar, Stone Town, Tanzania. In fact, these are one of the slave chambers that many Hebrew slaves had to go to. As you can see, this is one that's even in Stone Town, Tanzania, and is still there today. And in fact, many of these chambers could be found in many places such as churches and many other buildings and public locations even to this day. And this is where they were taken in order to be tortured, beat, raped, and even killed. And in fact, many of the Hebrew slaves that were in these conditions often also died of starvation. And of course, many of these Hebrew slaves were used for not only working and not only for domestic services, but they were also to be used for economic, military, and sexual purposes, because many of the Arab slave masters raped, abused, and subjugated the Hebrew women for nearly 1,200 years. And in fact, according to William Gervais Clarence Smith's book, Islam and Slavery, he even says, quote, "Productive slavery was more extensive in Islam than traditional accounts allow for. Even if large estates were rare, they were not absent. More striking were the numerous slaves on middling and small properties, a phenomenon about which surprisingly little has been written. Servile labor was also common in workshops, construction, mining, water control, transport by land and sea, and the extraction of marine resources. Whether a slave mode of production ever existed in Islam is moot, but the economic role of slavery was substantial, at least in certain places and at specific times. Not to mention how the Arab slave trade inspired and ushered in the European slave trade, as well as Africans, the Hamites, who also sold the Hebrews into slavery. But what you probably also did not know is that during the Arab slave trade, it sparked a massive, huge slave rebellion, one of the largest slave rebellions ever recorded in history. And this type of slavery in the Arab world existed for more than 1,200 years and even still goes on and prolongs itself today in many other places in the Arab world. And as you can see from a picture here, here is just some of how slavery looked back then and even today. In fact, scholar Murray Gordon also documents the harsh slavery and the harsh Arab slave trade in his book Slavery in the Arab World, and he not only talks about slavery that it was early as Muhammad, because yes, Muhammad also owned slaves, but he also talks about the slavery and how girls were sold for $160 and boys were sold for $240. Not to mention the deplorable conditions during the Arab slave trade, as well as the transatlantic slave trade. Now I'm showing you a picture that comes from the Arab slave trade back in 1868 that shows you a picture of the Hebrew servants and slaves. And even Captain G.L. Sullivan in his diary wrote, quote, "The deplorable condition of some of these poor wretches crammed into a small dhow surpasses all description. On the bottom of the dhow was a pile of stones as ballast, and on these stones, without even a mat, were 23 women huddled together, one or two with infants in their arms. These women were literally doubled up, there being no room to sit erect. On a bamboo deck, about 3 feet above the keep, were 48 men crowded together in the same way, and on another deck were 53 children. Some of the slaves were in the last stages of starvation and dysentery." Now many of the Hebrew slaves and their children were forced out of their homes and were chained and shackled, as you can see here, in order to be hauled and taken to the slave ships, where they were then brutalized and then subsequently tortured with no air in these slave ships whatsoever. And as you can see from this picture here, this is a view of the deck of the slave ship Alabinaz from Lieutenant Francis Meynell back in 1846. Now as you can see, this is the description of a slave ship which comes from the Menil collection in Houston, Texas as of 1789. Now many of these slave ships had been measured for the purposes of carrying Hebrew slaves onto them. Now this is how it looks if you enlarge the picture, because some figure estimates that over 600 slaves were carried onto a ship, even though the allowable limit was 454, so hundreds over the allowable limit, and it exceeded the limit on these slave ships. Not only were the Hebrew Israelites crammed onto these ships with little to no space whatsoever, but they were also forced to be into these spaces for long periods of time. Because as you can see, this is a section of a vessel showing the manner of stowing slaves on board. Here are some more models that show and depict the exact same treatment, the harsh, cruel treatment of these Hebrew Israelites on these ships. Because the conditions were so horrible, there was already little to no food to be eaten, not to mention how many of them starved to death, but many also died of lack of water and dehydration. And the Hebrew Israelites who tried to retaliate and fought back were also thrown into the Atlantic Ocean to be fed to the sharks. As you can see here, from the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, here is a slave ship display of the Hebrew Israelites and the harsh conditions that they went through, and you can find this in Detroit, Michigan. And because there was already little to no space on these ships, many of the Hebrews had to sit on each other, sleep on each other, as well as lie down on top of each other. And if that wasn't bad enough, many of them also had to endure the excess urine, excrement, and other waste that also remained on these slave ships. Here is a picture taken of Hebrew children on an actual slave ship, and as you can see the hunger and the starvation that is in their eyes, and you can see some of the horrible treatment and conditions of these different slave ships. You can also see how crowded the conditions really were and how they were on top of each other, but you can also even see how the slave masters made sure to keep them in check by whipping them anytime they were out of hand. As you can see here is a surviving picture of how it looked when the Hebrew Israelites disembarked off the slave ships if they survived, and this is how they arrived into the New World. In fact, many of the Hebrew servants and Hebrew Israelites, they arrived in Jamestown, America. The first of them arrived in 1619, and this is exactly how they look, with chains and shackles all around them. And this is how many of them looked worldwide. As you can see, they were chained and shackled wherever they went. And this wasn't just in America or any other parts of the Americas. This was also in the Arab world as well. But who profited from the slave trade, and just who benefited from the slave trade? Because what you will see is that there was in fact Jewish control over American slavery, and ironically enough, those who are calling themselves the real Jews were actually the same ones who enslaved the real Jews and funded their slavery, but they're not the only ones. Because as you see here from the documents illustrative of the history of the slave trade to America from Washington, D.C., courtesy the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, yes, their actual Jewish people did in fact fund and enslave the American slavery, and they weren't the only ones, because it was also British slave ship owners who profited 20 to 50%, as well as plantation owners, factory owners, West African tribal leaders, ports, bankers, and other people working these mandated jobs in order to keep the Israelites enslaved and also to profit from their free labor. And because the Zionists were already conspiring with the Roman Catholic Church to whitewash all of history, including the biblical images of the prophets, the Zionists also knew that the real Israelites were the ones who were being enslaved because of their transgression of the law, and they were in fact contributed to the funding of these slave ships, as you can see right here. But the Zionists also used this to their advantage, and they used it as their perfect opportunity to rob, steal, and take away the Israelites' culture and to hide them from their culture, heritage, and identity for hundreds and hundreds of years, and then begin their own conquest and plan into fooling the world into thinking that they were the real Israelites, courtesy the fake Israel of 1948, when they are in fact not, but did in fact contribute to funding slavery, just like they funded these textbooks to make you think that they're the actual chosen when they are in fact not. Not to mention how these Zionists also contributed to the dividing and to the colonization of Africa. And boy, did they do a good job fooling the entire world into making the world think that they're the real chosen when they are in fact not, but are the synagogues of Satan. And we're going to go over Dr. Raphael's book, Jews and Judaism in the United States, a documentary history from 1983, and we're going to go over a snippet of that book that talks about the central role of Jews in New World commerce and Israelite slave trade. Now this is what Dr. Mark Lee Raphael, who is a rabbi and professor of Judaic studies as well as the professor of religion and the chair of the Department of Religion at the College of William and Mary, and he's also visiting fellow of the Wolfson College located at Oxford University. This is what he had to say about the Jewish involvement of slavery of the real biblical Israelites. And he says, quote, Jews also took an active role in the Dutch colonial slave trade. Indeed, the bylaws of the Recife and Mauricia congregations of 1648 included an imposta Jewish tax of 5 soldos for each Negro slave a Brazilian Jew purchased from the West Indies Company. Slave auctions were postponed if they fell on a Jewish holiday, In Curacao in the 17th century, as well as in the British colonies of Barbados and Jamaica in the 18th century, Jewish merchants played a major role in the slave trade. In fact, in all of the American colonies, whether French, British, or Dutch, Jewish merchants frequently dominated. Groups of Jews began to arrive in Suriname in the middle of the 17th century after the Portuguese regained control of northern Brazil. By 1694, 27 years after the British had surrendered Suriname to the Dutch, there were about 100 Jewish families and 50 single Jews there, or about 570 persons. They possessed more than 40 estates and 9,000 slaves, contributed 25,905 pounds of sugar as a gift for the building of a hospital, and carried on an active trade with Newport and other colonial ports. By 1730, Jews owned 115 plantations and were a large part of a sugar export business which sent out 21,680,000 pounds of sugar to European and New World markets in 1730 alone. Slave trading was a major feature in the Jewish economic life in Suriname, which as a major stopping off point in the triangular trade. Both North American and Caribbean Jews played a key role in this commerce. Records of a slave sale in 1707 reveal that the 10 largest Jewish purchasers, 10,400 guiders, spent more than 25% of the total funds, or 38,605 guilders, exchanged. Jewish economic life in the Dutch West Indies, as in the North American colonies, consisted primarily of mercantile communities with large inequities in the distribution of wealth. Most fake Jews were shopkeepers, middlemen, or petty merchants who received encouragement and support from Dutch authorities along with many others. In Curacao, for example, Jewish communal life began after the Portuguese victory in 1654, and once again you can find this from Dr. Mark Lee Raphael's book, Jews and Judaism in the United States, a documentary history that was released in 1983. Now, of course, when it comes to American slavery specifically, we know that it wasn't just the Jewish people themselves. It was also many white people and many others who also sold the real biblical Israelites into slavery and held many public auctions for them, such as the bulletin that you see here from May 18th, 1829. But did you also know that Jesus was in fact a slave ship? Please do the research on this to find out for yourself, because yes, Jesus was the name of the slave ship captained by Sir John Hawkins in 1564 by appointment of the Queen of England, and it was one of the first slave ships that was chartered in England. Because the rest of the world knows who the real biblical Israelites are. In fact, they even tell you who the real biblical Israelites are, because as you can see from an actual plaque that's here in Virginia, it says Free Blacks of Israel Hill. And it says on the plaque that just to the west lies Israel Hill, settled in 1810 to 1811 by approximately 90 formerly enslaved persons who received freedom and 350 acres from Judith Randolph under the will of her husband, Richard Randolph, cousin of Thomas Jefferson. These, quote, Israelites and other free African Americans worked as farmers, craftspeople, and Appomattox River boatmen. Some labored alongside whites for equal wages and defended their rights in court. But what does it say? These, quote, Israelites and other free African Americans. But let's keep going. It also says that the family of early settler Hercules White bought and sold real estate in Farmville and joined with white citizens to found the town's first Baptist church in 1836. Israel Hill remained a vigorous black community into the 20th century. And when many of the Israelites were sold into slavery, and when many of them were sold in auctions, this was the conditions that they were placed in, because they had shackles around their necks, as you can see from a man here. And the result of these slave auctions, as we've gone over and as I've just shown you with snippets earlier ago, the result of this became that many of the Israelites were separated and dispersed from their families, never to see them again, because they were sold to work on cotton fields Not to mention all of the other laborious tasks that they had to do for their slave masters, as we will be uncovering and tackling in just a second to come. Meet Gordon. As you can see, this is only some of the abuse that Hebrew Israelites had to suffer through and had to go through during their times of slavery in America. Because yes, not only were they beaten and brutalized and murdered to death, but they were also had to suffer more than what you or I could ever imagine. In fact, for America alone, the slavery population increased more than 50%, and for good reason, because it was very valuable and the Hebrew Israelites were used for free labor, and all they had to do to them was shackle them in shekels, as you can see in a picture right here. And it was these instruments of torture that kept the Hebrew Israelites subjected to their oppressors and subjected to their masters and kept them enslaved to their masters for more than hundreds of years. And not only could they virtually go nowhere with all these chains shackled to their necks, but they were always subjected to their master and what their master told them to do, and the Hebrew Israelites were subjected to nothing except what their slave masters had referred to them as. In fact, according to Ira Berlin's Slaves Without Masters, fully 40% of the Southern free Negro population were classified as mulattoes, while only one slave in 10 had some white ancestry to them as of 1860. And even according to Stephen Dale of Carry Me Back, The Domestic Slave Trade in American Life, from the book published back in 2005, quote, Southern slave prices were more than tripled, and the prices of slaves went from $500 in New Orleans in 1800 to more than $1,800 in 1860, which is equivalent to about $30,000 in 2005, which is much more today. And according to more statistics from Stephen Dale, of the 3.2 million slaves that were working in the slave states in 1850, 1.8 million of them worked in cotton alone. Which means that more than 50% of Hebrew Israelites during the 1850s and the 1860s worked in plantation and worked in the cotton field, as well as working as field Hebrew Israelites as well as house Hebrew Israelites in America, as you can see in the following montage of pictures. But that's not all. It goes much deeper than that, because according to the Gilder Leman Institute of American History, 75% of white families owned not a single Hebrew Israelite slave, while 1% of mostly Jewish families owned 40 or more. And not only that, but 0.1% of Americans owned 100 or more Hebrew Israelites as slaves. Here is a picture of the real biblical Israelites as they're working on a cotton gin, and according to the Gilder Leman Institute of American History, of the total so-called African American population in 1860, nearly 90% of blacks were in fact slaves. Now mind you, blacks had only made up 13% of the total population, while 1 in 3 in the South were considered black. In fact, Virginia had the highest slave population, with close to 500,000 slaves in the state alone, and as you can see in many public places in America, they had public whippings for these so-called slaves, with many white people in attendance. They also had public whipping posts, as you can see from a picture taken here in North Carolina, and mind you, these were scattered all across America so that people can gather together and witness public witnesses and public slave whippings in America. In fact, 31% of all slaves that were held on plantations of 40 or more, now mind you, 1 out of 3 of them were children and 1 out of 8 of them were in fact elders. And in case you did not know, slavery was very lucrative for those who were practicing it indeed, because between 1732 and 1754, Hebrews accounted for more than 35% of the total immigration through the port of New York. Because you probably also did not know that New York City was in fact a major hub for the slave trade during the period of slavery all the way up until the end of the 1800s. So even during the 1700s and the 1800s, there was even slavery going on in the North, contrary to what your history books want you to believe. But it wasn't just the white man who was also enslaving the real biblical Israelites, because according to the Oklahoma Historical Society, it was also Native Americans in America who also owned slaves from the 18th century onward. In fact, by the time of the Civil War, more than 8,000 black Hebrews were enslaved in the Indian Territory, and even as late as 1885, more than 20 years after slavery supposedly ended, the governor of Chickasaw protested demands to free their black slaves. And even your lovely presidents who you so admire so much, even they own slaves too. Because did you know that George Washington had teeth that actually were yanked from the heads of his slaves and fitted into his dentures? Because you don't know your history if you're so-called black, because it's been taken from you and hidden from you and stolen from you, and you're going to see exactly why all of this happened to you. And when you start to understand that black history is in fact world history, then you start to understand that the real history of the real biblical Israelites traces all the way back even before slavery, and you start to understand that the real history of so-called African Americans stems all the way back since the beginning of time. And that is a fact, because what they also do not want you to know is that your ancestors, if you're watching this, have built the White House indeed, but they're going to keep hiding that from you too. And that's only just the beginning. And even according to the Civil War homepage taken from the 1860 census, what you will see is the total number of Hebrew Israelite slaves amounted to close to 4 million in just 1860 alone. But what they also want you to believe is that slavery really ended and was abolished in 1863, just a few years later with the Emancipation Proclamation, even though it really did not abolish the institution of slavery until December 1865, when the 13th Amendment was finally amended and when it was added to the Constitution. And what they also want you to believe is that a man by the name of Abraham Lincoln was the one who really freed the slaves, but then who was killed by the elite Illuminati because the Zionists at the very top did not want slavery to end. And you also probably did not know that Mr. Abraham Lincoln himself not only owned slaves, and it's a known fact that he kept slaves, but he also beat, raped, and mutilated the slaves that he owned too, and he's not the only president that was guilty of this as well. But that's only just the start of it, because in A Slavery of World History, Milton Meltzer estimates that 10 million slaves arrived in the Americas. This would be the residue after 12.5% of those shipped out from Africa died on the ocean, 4.5% died while waiting in harbor, and 33% died during the first year of seasoning. In the Atlantic slave trade and the Holocaust from the book Is the Holocaust Unique from Greenbaugh's edition of 1996, Seymour Drescher estimates that 21 million were enslaved between 1700 and 1850, of which 7 million remained in slavery inside Africa. 4 million died, quote, as a direct result of enslavement, unquote. Of the 12 million shipped to America, 15% or 2 million more died in the Middle Passage and seasoning year. In Jan Rogozinski's A Brief History of the Caribbean, published back in 1994, quote, as million as 8 million Africans may have died in order to bring 4 million slaves to the Caribbean islands, unquote. And in Ronald Siegel's Islam's Black Slaves, Ronald Siegel estimates that the number of Hebrew Israelites shipped to the Muslim world was at 11.5 to 14 million, with about 19 million estimated deaths. Here are some more statistics from the University of Essex. Philip Curtin, as of 1969, estimated that the Atlantic slave trade was about 9 million. Joseph Inikori from 1976 estimated the slave trade to be approximately 15 million from Measuring the Atlantic Slave Trade, and Patrick Manning from 1998, according to W.E.B. Du Bois Institute dataset of slaving voyages, estimates that 12 million were transported, with 10.5 million arriving alive in the Americas, accounting for at least 1.5 million deaths of Hebrew Israelites during the time of the passages from Africa to America alone. Within a 1200-year period and ongoing, more than 100 million Hebrew people have been killed, murdered, tortured, raped, and or brutalized because of slavery, whether it be Arab or European. But this is not the first time that the Hebrew people have been enslaved on such a level as this. Oh no, because throughout history there have been 7 major captivities for the Hebrew people, the first being Egypt, the second being Assyria, the third Babylon, the fourth Persia, the fifth Greek, the sixth Rome, which includes the Arab slave trade, and the seventh and final captivity being America, which stems from Rome. And in case you also did not know, here is more history for you, that the original Statue of Liberty was given to America by France in order to pay homage to the slaves whom were brought here by force, which was to represent their freedom. However, what America decided to do was refuse the original, so they made a new one with the white face instead, and you can find the original in St. Martin today. But did you also know that there is in fact Hebrew cursive that is found at the very first slave church ever to be established in the United States of America? And even the website itself tells you this, because here I am at the actual website that says First African Baptist Church. Now mind you, it was changed from First Colored Church to First African Baptist Church, and it was first organized in Savannah, Georgia around 1788, and it even says that the pews located in the balcony are original to the church. These pews were made by slaves and are nailed into the floors. On the outside of the pews are markings written in the African dialect known as, quote, cursive Hebrew. How else could they have known Hebrew? As you can see from a photograph taken here are a group of white children that are holding a fish pole, and they tied the line to the neck of a so-called Hebrew boy. And as you can see right here, the Hebrew boy is standing on what appears to be a brick, and the children all around him are all taunting him. And this white boy right here appears to be reading from a book commonly known as the Holy Scriptures or the Bible. And the verse that he's probably reading from, along with many other slave masters during this time, is 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 18 that says, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the froward. And if you read that in the NIV translation, you will get that slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. Not only did the slave master and did their children beat the Hebrew out of the Hebrew children and the Hebrew people, but what they also did is that they used their Christianity and they used religion in order to subjugate the Hebrew people and enslave them to religion itself, and to erase and wipe away their identity and culture and heritage from them by forcing them to learn Christianity and to abandon their original Hebrew heritage and tradition and language behind. Not only that, but as the movie Root has even told us, that many of them had to abandon their old names unless they had to be whipped for it or hung on a fish pole, as we see with this boy right here today. We also know that many of the Hebrew people, they sang many songs and sang songs of Moses, as well as many spirituals such as Kumbaya, which also has the name of our father Yah or Yahuwah in it. But what the slave master had to do in order to subject them and subjugate them even more is they had to strip them from their identity and their culture so that they would not know who they were, abandon their language so that they had to learn English, and force them to learn what they wanted them to learn, but make it so that they could not read or write, and make it so that they would not know who they are, so that the slave masters can own them and use certain scriptures of the Bible, but not use certain scriptures such as Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 20 26, because the slave masters knew, and these children knew, that if the so-called slaves knew who they were, and if they knew how to read and write, then they would know who they really are. But not only was religion used to subjugate the so-called slaves into submitting to their masters and oppressors and into beating them senselessly, because in case you did not also know, the Roman Catholic Church conspired with the Zionists in order to force Christianity down their throats and many other religions as well, but there was also raping going on too, and mutilation, and not to mention many other forms of torture and oppression, which we're going to talk about in just a second to come. Because what you will find is that all throughout history, many of the women were subjugated and raped and castrated, if not killed, by their masters. And what you're actually looking at is a picture taken from colonization. And we're going to be talking more about colonization in just a moment to come. But before we do, I would like to focus your attention on some of the things and how the master-slave relationship really went. Because according from excerpts from Bowdoin University, slave women were forced to comply with sexual advances by their masters on a very regular basis. And we know if they did not do this, then there were harsh consequences that came their way, not just for them, but also for their families and their men who were tending the fields in the cotton fields back during the times of slavery. But here's also another excerpt from Stanley Feldstein's Once a Slave, The Slave's View of Slavery, from page 132, and it even says that, quote, Maria was a 13-year-old house servant. One day, receiving no response to her call, the mistress began searching the house for her. Finally, she opened the parlor door, and there was the child with her master. The master ran out of the room, mounted his horse, and rode off to escape, though well he knew that his wife's full fury would fall upon the young head of his victim. The mistress beat the child and locked her up in a smokehouse. For 2 weeks, the girl was constantly whipped. Some of the elderly servants attempted to plead with the mistress on Maria's behalf and even hinted that it was Master that was to blame. The mistress' reply was typical. She'll know better in the future. After I've done with her, she'll never do the like again through ignorance. During this time, European settlers, kings, bankers, and the like set out on a mission and expedition to steal and pillage the land of Africa, as well as rape the women and trigger a mass genocide like never before. In fact, the European settlers were also used to spread disease in these places as well, and they pillaged the land just to get and attain the wealth, gold, ivory, silver, jewels, goods, and other resources from Africa, since Africa is the wealthiest continent on the earth, by the way. Between the 1870s and the 1900s, Africa faced the European imperialist aggression, diplomatic pressures, military invasion, which eventually led up to the eventual conquest of Africa by many European settlers. And a picture that you're looking at right now is actually a caricature of Cecil Rhodes, who is also known to colonize Rhodesia, which is known as present-day Zimbabwe. Here is a map that is showing you the partition of Africa due to colonialism and imperialism as of 1914. And as you can see, based on this map alone, you see that it is practically controlled by Europe itself. Because when you take a closer look at this map, you see that portions of Italy control and owned Somalia and Libya at this point. In fact, in Portugal, they owned and controlled Angola and Mozambique, hence Portuguese being spoken in these countries today. Not to mention Great Britain, how they controlled Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, and eventually Tanzania, Nigeria, and much of southern Africa, including the parts that are now known today as South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, along with many others. But that's not all, because as you can see, France pretty much controlled all of Western Africa, including Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Mali, Mauritania, and many other nations that are located in Western Africa today, and Germany controlled much of Namibia, Tanzania, and Cameroon, and in fact many African nations were not even independent until the 1960s, only 50 years worth of recovery so far, and in fact in 1914 only 2 nations were independent in Africa, and they were Liberia and Ethiopia. Because when you kill 10 million so-called Africans, you are not called the Hitler, but only when it has to do with the so-called alleged 6 million, and only when it has to do with the alleged so-called Holocaust, ignoring and completely taking away from the real Holocaust of hundreds of millions of people. But in case you do not know who this man is, what you're looking at is King Leopold II, which is the second king of the Belgians as he's known, and he was a king in Belgium, and he was in fact the tyrant, and he was the ruler of Belgium from 1885 all the way up until 1908, just a year prior to his death in 1909. Because what your history textbooks will not tell you, and what your history teachers will neglect to tell you, and what all of those textbooks and history books will neglect and fail to tell you, is that this man is responsible for the mutilation and the beating and the enslavement and the killing of tens of millions of people around the early 1900s and the late 1800s. But they don't want you to know that, because you're actually looking at real pictures of Congolese children that were mutilated in the early 1900s by King Leopold II under the authority of King Leopold II. And as you can see in all of these pictures, these children are without hands, they are missing hands, they are missing fingers, and they are in fact had their fingers and their hands chopped off, as you can see, and they were victims of mutilation. And this was only some of the many torturings and punishments that were going on in the Congo under the rulership of King Leopold II. But this history has been neglected from you, and this has been hidden and suppressed from you for so long, because they want you to think that all black people are bad, and they want to try to demonize black people as much as they can, but they don't want to tell you their track record and their history, and they want to completely leave out their history because everything has been twisted. But now the truth is coming to light, and now that you see the truth and what has happened with your own 2 eyes, with history to prove it yourself, now you'll know the truth for what it really is. Because while this man will continue to be glorified in white history, meanwhile King Leopold II is responsible for the genocide of over 10 million people worldwide, because he owned the Congo during his reign as the constitutional monarch of Belgium. However, after several failed colonial attempts in Asia and Africa, he settled on the Congo. He bought it and enslaved its people, turning the entire country into his own personal slave plantation. He disguised his business transactions as philanthropic and scientific efforts under the banner of the International African Society. He used their enslaved labor to extract Congolese resources and services. His reign was enforced through work camps, body mutilations, as I've just shown you, torture, executions, and his own private army. In fact, Mark Twain, the author of the commonly known books The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, as well as Tom Sawyer, has even written about King Leopold in a soliloquy called King Leopold's Soliloquy, and it says from a text there, yes, they go on telling everything, these chatterers. They tell how I levy incredibly burdensome taxes upon the natives, taxes which are a pure theft, taxes which they must satisfy by gathering rubber under hard and constantly harder conditions, and by raising and furnishing food supplies gratis, and it all comes out that, when they fall short of their tasks through hunger, sickness, despair, and ceaseless and exhausting labor without rest, and forsake their homes and flee to the woods to escape punishment, my black soldiers, drawn from unfriendly tribes, and instigated and directed by my Belgians, hunt them them down and butcher them and burn their villages, reserving some of the girls. They tell it all, how I am wiping a nation of friendless creatures out of existence by every form of murder for my private pocket's sake. But they never say, although they know it, that I have labored in the cause of religion at the same time and all the time, and have sent missionaries there of a convenient stripe, as they phrase it, to teach them the error of their ways, and bring them to him who is all mercy and love, and who is the sleepless guardian and friend of all who suffer. They tell only what is against me, they will not tell what is in my favor. Right? And the reason I've shared that brief passage with you is so that you know the whole truth and nothing but the truth about the history that has been suppressed from you for so long, but so that you can also wake up to the world around you and see exactly all of what has been suppressed from you, not to mention what you can see what happened to the real biblical Israelites, and so that you can witness yourself what is known as the biggest anti-Semitic crime that has been perpetrated against the entire world. But meanwhile, while the conquest of Africa continued with imperialism and colonialism, and while King Leopold II continued his tyrannical ways among many others, they gave you the illusion of Negro emancipation, and we're going to talk more about lynching and how it was all just a big psyop. Much of the rest of the world still face slavery, and I'm showing you a photo of a picture taken from the Zanzibar slave market, and as you can see, here is a child that is chained down and shackled, and you can even see that his feet are shackled to the ground as well. Here is a picture of Hebrew Israelites who were being punished even in Cuba, and this photograph was taken somewhere in Havana. And not to mention how there was even slavery in Brazil, which did not officially end until the year 1888, over 20 years after the alleged ending of American slavery in 1865. Not to mention the gruesome slavery that took place in Haiti and is even still being practiced in much of Haiti even today, even as we speak. But what is often quite ignored and deeply ignored from all of the history books and all of the history textbooks is in fact the slavery that took place in Australia. Because yes, slavery took place in Australia during this time as well, during the time of colonization, especially during the period of the late 1800s and the early 1900s as well. And the picture that you're currently looking at is what's commonly known as Aboriginals, Hebrew Israelites who fled from captivity during the time of Assyria and who landed all the way to Australia only to be taken captive by those who wanted to colonize them. Because slavery in Australia, which is commonly known as Aboriginal slavery, was just as bad as the slavery in America. And here you can actually see a picture of so-called Aboriginals as they were chained up and shackled all the way to their necks. And yes, they were in fact naked, and yes, dogs had it better than they did. In fact, in his 1890 novel entitled The Black Police, A Story of Modern Australia, Arthur James Vaughan suggests that slavery in present-day Australia took place in present-day northern and western Australia towards the coastlines during that time. And according to Indigenous Participation in Australian Economies II by ANU E-Press, the Australian National University 2012, Chapter 9, and it comes from the subsection Aboriginal Workers, Aboriginal Poverty, shelter for many Aboriginal workers was worse than they would provide for their pet horse, motor car, or prize cattle. And this is according to the Chief Protector of Aborigines, Queensland, 1921. So what that means is that they treated horses and they treated motor cars and they treated cattle and they treated dogs better than they treated their own workers, better than they treated human beings. And this is according to history itself, even as I've shown you earlier ago. And if that wasn't bad enough, what many settlers also did and what European settlers also did is that they forced people into blackbirding, which is tricking people into forced labor, as you can see in a picture right here. In fact, from an interview taken from ABC National Radio in the early 1900s in Queensland, despite regarded as more reliable than superior white stock riders, Aboriginal workers received only about 3% of the white wage rate. From 1919, the government claimed pastoral workers would get 66% of the white wage, but records show that in 1949, the Aboriginal workers only got 31%. In fact, Aboriginal people would never get the 60% at all. Every year between 1941 and 1956, the government sold Aboriginal labor for less than that. In fact, tens of millions of dollars were taken out of the Queensland Trust and never returned to the Aboriginal workers. In some cases, they were bought and sold as a personal possession, particularly where they went with the property upon sale. Many Aboriginals had a restricted freedom of choice and movement, irrespective of any lack of consent. Many were subjected to threats and force. They were always in fear of all forms of violence. Many were treated cruelly and abused. Their sexuality was controlled and their labor was forced. But it was all about the money, because a University College London study tracing the legacies of British slave ownership has shown that Australia was partly built from slave money. Following the abolition of slavery in Australia, British slave owners received compensation from the British government for the loss of their property people sold into slavery. Many of them used the money to travel to Australia, where they brought up large parcels of land, became directors of banks, museums, libraries, and built churches, and became governors. But the racism goes much deeper than that, because did you know that throughout the entire 19th and 20th centuries that there were in fact known as human zoos and Negro villages, where there were these human zoos where Hebrews were placed into these zoos and they were treated like animals, as you see right here. Because this picture right here is showing you a Hebrew girl that is in a human zoo back in Brussels, Belgium as of 1958. And yes, these actually existed not too long ago, because this picture was taken not even hardly 70 years ago. So you can only imagine the cruel harshness that these people had to go through, that the real biblical Israelites had to go through. Because here's a picture of Otabinga, who is a Congolese woman wrestling with an orangutan at the Bronx Zoo, New York at a 1906 display. And many times they were placed with monkeys, and many times they were placed with orangutans and gorillas because of Charles Darwinism, not to mention the false theory of evolution, which we know is in fact false. In fact, many of these human displays and many of these human zoos featured naked women, and the women were often depicted naked at these human zoos, because these people did not regard them as humans, and they did not regard them as people, but rather as animals and rather as specimens. And mind you, these Hebrew people were taken from their children, taken from their home, and taken from their families, only to get laughed at by a people who hated them. Many of the Hebrews that were placed into these human zoos were also depicted as circus performers, entertainers, and whatever deemed necessary, and whatever talents that they had in order to be exploited, kind of like what we see today. Has anything really changed? Has anything really changed since then? It doesn't look like it, because here I am showing you a picture of the tribe of genuine Ubangi savages, according to them, because they thought it was a joke, and they placed it on postcards and they shared it everywhere, even with their friends, because they had no remorse whatsoever, not even an apology for what they have done to the Hebrew people and the real biblical Israelites. Because what's also not shared in your history textbooks, in your Zionist written textbooks, is that these exhibits and these human zoos were popular exhibits all across the world. In fact, tens of millions of people all over, from Asians to Europeans to all types of people, even Arabs, came to view these human displays in both the 19th and the 20th centuries. But it wasn't just the so-called black people who experienced this either, it was also native peoples as well, because here at the 1904 World's Fair, 2,000 primitive peoples were on display. The purpose of the display was to demonstrate the superiority of the white Americans who had evolved further according to them, and according to anthropologist W.J. McGee designed the display From the Century for Young People by ABC Peter Jennings. But in case you're also wondering, since so-called white people did not use so-called black people for their Olympics, they created an Olympics of their own for these so-called black people, and they even called them the Savage Olympics, as you can see here from a picture taken in 1904. And in case you're looking for these displays today, don't worry, Paris hasn't forgotten about it, because it's even a display in Paris which shows the remains of Saartjie Baartman's body, and you can see her remains are in a museum located in Paris, France, even to this day. See, this was all just a joke, because what you're looking at actually did in fact happen, because all throughout many carnivals in the 19th and 20th century, yes, what you see actually happened, what's called hit the nigger baby, where someone would throw a baseball at so-called African Americans and so-called black people, impounding them into the head. As you can see, this photograph here comes from the Dallas Public Library Photographic Archives, and what does it say? Hit the trigger and duck the nigger, because it was just a joke to them. And then also this photograph here, which even says hit the red spot, down he goes, and this young boy was working in a dunk tank in Dallas, Texas as of 1965, barely 50 years ago. Oh, and he was only working because it's just a joke to them. But this type of racism was also featured in popular cartoons such as Popeye, and it was even featured in different games and different music and other venues and forms of entertainment back then, because it was only just a joke to them. Oh my friends, I'm not making any of this stuff up. This stuff really did happen, and it's time you see with both your eyes open the harsh realities of what happened to the real biblical Israelites and what continues to happen on a daily basis, if not secondly basis, because now I'm showing you a process of what's known as human branding. And human branding is burning iron onto someone until they are burned completely, to the point where their incisions are all the way through, and their cuts are wounded, and their wounds are wounded, and their sores are sored, and they are sorely wounded for the rest of their lives. And let's not forget about buck breaking, which is when a slave master would sodomize the Hebrew slave man so that he could not take revenge against his enemy. And of course, we also have what's called human leather, and these shoes that you're looking at actually contain human leather, because yes, human leather was used, and this is true, the skin of Hebrews were actually used to make human leather, and it was made from the skin of Hebrew slaves used for shoes. In fact, this was a practice that occurred from 1619 all the way up into the Jim Crow era of the 1960s. And if you still do not believe me, then maybe you'll believe an excerpt that comes from the Mercury of Philadelphia News, which you can find from Ferris State University as of Saturday, March 17, 1888. And it says, "I remember that 2 or 3 years ago I incidentally referred to a prominent physician of this city wearing shoes made from the skin of Negroes. He still adhered to that custom, insisting that the tan hide of an African makes the most enduring and the most pliable leather known to man. Only last week I met him upon the street with a brand new pair of shoes. I looked at his footwear as I always do. His pedal coverings have an irresistible fascination for me, and said with a smile, 'Is the downtrodden African still beneath your feet?' In the most matter-of-fact way, and without the shadow of a smile, he answered and said, 'I suppose you mean to inquire if I still wear shoes made of the skin of a Negro. I certainly do, and I don't propose changing in that respect until I find a leather that is softer and will last longer and present a better appearance. I have no sentiment about this matter. Were I a Southerner in the American sense of the word, I might be accused of being actuated by a race prejudice, but I am a foreigner by birth, although now an American citizen by naturalization. I fought in the rebellion that the blacks might be freed. I would use a white man's skin for the same purpose if it were sufficiently thick, and if anyone has a desire to wear my epidermis upon his feet after I have drawn my last breath, he has my antemortem permission. You are probably wondering why I'm showing you a picture of a picnic basket right now, and why I'm just showing you a picture of a picnic. Why is this the case? Because when you understand that the word picnic is actually short for pick a nigger, and that lynchings used to be announced in churches and they would sell tickets as well as have picnics, all while watching the black Hebrew Israelites die slowly, well then you'll understand, and then you'll know that this word has a real different meaning from what Snopes wants you to believe. And the next time you're thinking about shopping for Black Friday, you'll know exactly what Black Friday really is, because it's known as the day after Thanksgiving. And by the way, Thanksgiving commemorates the murder of millions of Native Americans by pilgrims, but oh well, slave traders would then sell their slaves for a discount on this day to assist with plantation owners, hence the name. Not false like Snopes wants you to believe. Now perhaps you're wondering what you're actually looking at, and perhaps you're wondering what this picture is actually showing you. Well, when you look closely at this picture, you will see actual alligators eating Hebrew babies, in a term that's commonly known as gator bait. And yes, this actually happened because this is an actual picture, an actual photograph that was taken of Florida. As you can see here, this alligator over here is actually chomping down and gnawing on this Hebrew little child right here, who's trying to hold on to this tree with another alligator trying to assist. And this happened when the slave masters and the slave owner, they would take the Hebrew child away from its own mother, and then they would feed the Hebrew child to the alligators in order to use the alligators to bait them, and then skin the alligators alive in order to sell them and to then use them as food and other personal items and belongings. But see, this history you will not find in a history textbook whatsoever, because here is an actual postcard from Florida showing you of actual alligator bait and Hebrew children being fed to actual alligators. And it doesn't stop there, because this is actually showing you an advertisement which even shows you what alligator bait and gator bait, they thought it was a joke. Nope, I'm not making any of this up, because as you can see here from a dainty morsel, it's showing you alligator bait, but what it's also really showing you really comes from a cigar, and it's actually showing you a cigar box label and how the cigar box labels actually looked back then. And if that wasn't bad enough, here is another picture showing you of actual alligator bait postcards that were shared with people not even barely 100 years ago. Can you believe that? Don't worry, it only gets worse from here, because now I'm showing you actual farm fans of actual gator bait terms that was used on these farm fans, and I would not be surprised that they were used in churches as well in the state of Florida. And it wasn't just Florida, it was also Louisiana. Here is another farm fan, and as you can see, this farm fan shows you another one of alligator baits that was commonly used in Florida, because it was all used for jokes and it was all used for games because they thought it was a joke. And when you know and understand what alligators really are and what the seed of alligators really is, then you start to understand exactly how spiritual all of this really is. But if you do not know what I'm talking about, then I highly recommend you watch my video, Are Dinosaurs Real? Because then you'll know exactly what I mean. But they even use alligator bait, and they even joked about it, and they even wrote songs and plays and musicals about it, because I'm even showing you a pamphlet that features the exact same thing. I wonder what they were really using it for. And don't worry, you could always ensure that you would have a perfect writing utensil, because here's a 1960s alligator pencil holder with the black baby in its mouth. I wonder how it got there. Were they just making it up? Is it all a great big hoax, or are they trying to tell you something? Because yes, gator bait was the practice of using little Hebrew children as bait to catch alligators, and it was done during the slave times in Florida and Louisiana and other parts in the American South, whether you want to believe it or not. But don't worry, if that's not proof enough for you, this is, because there's even proof in newspapers as well. Because as you even see in this one, babies used as alligator bait in state of Florida. And it's even been proven in Sharon Draper's 2006 book, Copper's Son, where it's documented, as well as the 1908 Washington Times issue where it even says baited alligators with pickaninnies from the New York Zoological Garden, as well as from an issue of Oakland Tribune from September 21st, 1923, where it even says pickaninny bait lures voracious gator to death. And mind you, that was the headline. But you don't have to worry, because even the Library of Congress also features the same thing from an article in Kilmore Free Press dated back from June 1st of 1911. And don't you worry, because it wasn't just in America. Oh no, this was going on in other places such as India as well, because it even says lured by babies, how British sportsmen hunt crocodiles in India. And how did they do that? They says we used to have great sport in India going out after crocodiles with Hindu babies for bait, or was it Hebrew babies for bait, and the baby wasn't even baited on a hook like a minnow or a fish worm. And where did they get these babies from? They got it from their mothers, but they didn't care because it was just a sport to them. But why? Why is the question. Why seems to remain the question that we have. Why did all of this evil come upon this one group of people? Why all of this affliction and torture and pain and hurt among this one group of people? Well, scripture tells us in the book of Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah chapter 16 verses 10 through 13, where it says, "And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt show this people all these words, and they shall say unto thee, Wherefore hath Yahuwah pronounced all this great evil against us? Or what is our iniquity? Or what is our sin that we have committed against Yahuwah our Elohim? Then shalt thou say unto them, Because your fathers have forsaken me, saith Yahuwah, and have walked after other gods, and have served them, and have worshipped them, and have forsaken me, and have not kept my law, and ye have done worse than your fathers, for behold, ye walk every one after the imagination of his evil heart, that they may not hearken unto me. Therefore will I cast you out of this land into a land that ye know not, neither ye nor your fathers, and there shall ye serve other gods day and night, where I will not show you favor." And also the book of Baruch tells you the same thing. But see, they had to take that book out of the KJV today because they don't want you to know the truth. But Baruch chapter 2 verses 30 says, "For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves." And do not worry, because there is always hope, and there is a way to fix all of this. There is a solution and remedy to all of this, and we're going to go over it in just a second. Do not worry, Yashrael, do not worry, Israel, because our redemption draweth nigh. Leviticus chapter 26. "But if ye will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and if ye shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that ye will not do all my commandments, but that ye break my covenant, I also will do this unto you. I will even appoint over you terror, consumption, and the burning ague, that shall consume the eyes, and cause sorrow of heart. And ye shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. And I will set my face against you, and ye shall be slain before your enemies. They that hate you shall reign over you, and ye shall flee when none pursueth you. And if ye will not yet for this hearken unto me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. And I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heaven as iron, and your earth as brass. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits. And if ye walk contrary unto me, and will not hearken unto me, I will bring 7 times more plagues upon you according to your sins. I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, and destroy your cattle, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. And if ye will not be reformed by me by these things, but will walk contrary unto me, then will I also walk contrary unto you, and will punish you yet 7 times for your sins. And I will bring a sword upon you, that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. And when ye are gathered together within your cities, I will send the pestilence among you, and ye shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. And when I have broken the staff of your bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall deliver you your bread again by weight, and ye shall eat and not be satisfied. And if ye will not for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary unto me, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury, and I, even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. And ye shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall ye eat. And I will destroy your high places, and cut down your images, and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries into desolation, and I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths as long as it lieth desolate. And ye be in your enemy's land, even then shall the land rest, and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths, when ye dwelt upon it. And upon them that are left alive of you I will send a faintness into their hearts, in the lands of their enemies. And the sound of a shaken leaf shall chase them, and they shall flee as fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when none pursueth. And they shall fall one upon another, as it were before a sword, when none pursueth, and ye shall have no power to stand before your enemies. And ye shall perish among the heathen, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands, and also in the iniquity of their fathers shall they pine away with them. Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 through 68. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of Yahuwah thy Elohim, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. Yahuwah shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke, and all that thou settest thy hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed, and until thou perish quickly, because of the wickedness of thy doings, whereby thou hast forsaken me. Yahuwah shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. Yahuwah shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And thy carcass shall be meat unto all fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither Yahuwah shall lead thee. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of Yahuwah thy Elohim, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, because thou servest not Yahuwah thy Elohim with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies which Yahuwah shall send against thee, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee. Yahuwah shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because thou wouldst not obey the voice of Yahuwah thy Elohim. And it shall come to pass that as Yahuwah rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so Yahuwah will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. And Yahuwah shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But Yahuwah shall give thee there a trembling of heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee. And thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. In the morning thou shalt say, Would Elohim it were even, and at even thou shalt say, Would Elohim it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. And Yahuwah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. But the question still remains, so-called African Americans, so-called black people, why? Why did all of this happen to you at such an unprecedented rate? Why all of this pain and all of this hurt and all of this torture like never before? Because you did not keep the covenant with your Father Yahuwah in heaven. You did not keep the laws, statutes, and commandments that He has commanded your ancestors. And because you did not keep the laws, statutes, and commandments, you were sold into slavery. Because you did not keep the laws, statutes, and commandments, you had the KKK brutalize you and beat you and murder you to death. Because you did not keep the law, statutes, and commandments, you had lynching going on back then and even today. And by the way, in case you did not know, the real Messiah of the New Testament, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus, because the real name of the Messiah in Hebrew is Yahusha, was in fact hung on a tree. And there are actual scriptures to prove this in the New Testament, that yes, the real Messiah, who's black by the way, and there's scriptures for that as well, was in fact hung on a tree. Well, who are the only group of people you know in history who were hung on trees? I'll let this video answer that question. Because you did not follow the law, statutes, and commandments, Christianity was shoved down your throats so that your enemies could oppress you. Because you did not tithe every 3 years like you were supposed to, that is the reason why you have your Creflo got your dollars and your TD Snakes and all of those Christian Zionists at the top who are Zionist funded, who are lying to you and telling you that tithing has everything to do with money and giving it to a pimpin' pastor, even though scripture itself tells you that it has to do with food and giving food to the poor. Because you did not keep the covenant, that is why you have fake Jewish Khazars who are masquerading around pretending to be you, and they are in your land with your culture, and they have the Torah from your father that was given to you, which is why you are constantly told that the Torah and the Old Testament is only for the Jewish people, and your Christian pastor continues to shove down your throat, who's probably Zionist funded by the way, that the law is done away with so that your enemies can continue to rule over you and oppress you and continue to shove Christianity down your throat and the doctrine of love and forgiveness down your throat under Christianity so that they can continue to rule over you. You have been lied to for centuries, and you have been told by your enemies that your language does not matter because yes, Hebrew is your native tongue. You have been told that your history does not matter because yes, the Old Testament is in fact your history about you because yes, the Bible is a history book about Hebrew people. It is not a religious book about Jewish or Christian people. You've been told that your culture does not matter, which is your Torah, and you've been told that your heritage does not matter, which is why you borrow the customs and the traditions of your enemies, such as these holidays, and you have been told that you do not matter whatsoever. Not anymore. Could that explain all of the hurt, pain, and abuse, especially even after the period of slavery and after the period of the Civil War, even up until today? Because they will never tell you what happened before your ancestors arrived on those slave ships, just like they probably will not tell you about J. Marion Sims, who is supposed to be the father of gynecology, who was lauded as an American hero in white stream media. But what if I told you that this man did some very evil things? In fact, he's responsible for medical experimentations, but did you also know that throughout the 1830s all the way up until the 1870s, not only did this man own slaves and purchase many of them that he experimented on, but he even defended slavery post-Civil War, and he studied in gynecology, which is the study of disease when it comes to women and girls' reproductive systems. But what if I told you that he also conducted experimentations on infants and babies where he would pry the bones of their skulls open, which was a practice that he would only do on Hebrew babies, and then he would blame the mothers for their babies suffering and blame the ignorance on them. But what he would also do is butcher their brains out, part of their plan for depopulation, in an attempt to wipe out the Hebrew race altogether. And mind you, no anesthesia was used on these babies or these women whatsoever, and this is according to activist Wendy Brinker. And maybe that explains all of the human specimens and medical experimentation that occurred in the late 1800s as well as the early 1900s, because did you know that Hebrew babies and Hebrew people were sold as specimens to greedy white doctors who then used and exploited and subjugated their bodies in order to be used for their purposes and for their gains of money? Because yes, they were in fact used as souvenirs, and their black body parts parts were in fact used as souvenirs. And according to Dr. Harvey Young, who is a historian and scholar of theater and African American studies at Northwestern University, in his publication entitled The Black Body as Souvenirs in American Lynching, he even quotes and talks about all of the different horrific medical experimentation and how black bodies were in fact used to be sold as specimens, but it goes much deeper than that as well. But such a practice was also going on when it came to Hebrew children as well, and it wasn't just the adults either, it was also the Hebrew babies. And according to Ralph Ginsberg's 100 Years of Lynching that was published in the Baltimore Black Classics Press, it even said that before the torch was applied to the pyre, the Negro was deprived of his ears, fingers, and genital parts of his body. He pleaded pitifully for his life while the mutilation was going on, but stood the ordeal of fire with surprising fortitude. Before the body was cool, it was cut to pieces, the bones were crushed into small bits, and even the tree upon which the wretch met his fate was torn up and disposed of as souvenirs. The Negro's heart was cut into several pieces, as was also his liver. Those unable to obtain ghastly relics directly paid their more fortunate possessors extravagant sums for them. Small pieces of bones went for 25 cents, and a bit of liver crisply cooked sold for 10 cents. And mind you, that's not all that they used these body parts for. They also used them for other wicked and heinous things, and even for black markets. And those weren't the only medical experimentations going on at that time, because in the early and mid 1900s there was also the Tuskegee experiment, where your government and military conducted experimentation on so-called black people in order to give them syphilis and to try to kill them off even sooner. But that wasn't the only way that they were trying to wipe out the Hebrew population, because there was also Planned Parenthood as well, under the guises of Margaret Sanger, the program's founder. And in case you did not know, in a 1939 letter to Dr. Clarence Gamble, Margaret Sanger describes what's known as the Negro Project, where she planned to use Planned Parenthood as a method and as a means of wiping out the Hebrew population, and the way that they would do that is through abortions and placing abortion clinics in Hebrew neighborhoods, and doing so in order to attempt to exterminate the Hebrew population, as well as to make the Hebrew women not be able to have children. And did you know that so-called black women have the highest rate of abortions in the entire country? And by the way, in case you also did not know, Hillary Clinton also supports Planned Parenthood and has been open about supporting Planned Parenthood. She also supports the extermination of the Hebrew population. And maybe that explains Black Wall Street and why a town that was filled with Hebrews back in the 1920s that was doing so well was then pillaged and raped and murdered altogether, and then taken away all of their goods and all of their black businesses, not to mention children being placed on the death penalty, such as George Stinney. But there are even more operations such as COINTELPRO, which is the FBI's program to disrupt the Black Panthers and many other organizations in case of and due to so-called emergencies. Not to mention the King Alfred Plan, which was the CIA's operation to attempt to exterminate Hebrew people via FEMA camps in a major race war and race riot, which is why you're constantly seeing all of these race wars and race riots when it comes to the police brutality. But what if I told you that this has been going on for well over 50 years and is something that's even been going on even today, because many black leaders such as Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, along with many others, cannot do anything to save you or deliver you from your pain and affliction, because they cannot deliver and because you're under a curse. And you may be wondering exactly what that curse is, and that is why you had such events such as the Birmingham church bombing happen, where a bombing actually struck a church, but all your ancestors would do is march and protest all about it. But it turns out that here we are once again, even protesting and marching today, once again, how many years later, and it seems as though nothing has changed. If anything, it seems as though it's gotten worse, and the question remains, why is that the case, and why is it not getting better in Hebrew communities and so-called black communities? In fact, why was AIDS targeted against Hebrew people, and why was the drug war created by the Nixon administration in order to target so-called black people, in order to try to wipe them out and to try to exterminate them from being a people to begin with? Why all of these woes? And even worse, why are drugs constantly being trafficked in your neighborhood courtesy of your government and the CIA and all of these other alphabet soup's intelligence agencies? Why are they constantly drug trafficking into your neighborhoods and bringing them there in order to put you into prison and to put your children and your men into the prisons to keep the prison industry high? Because newsflash, white people commit more crimes than any other race of people in America, and that is a statistical fact according to the FBI. So if that's the case, then why are there more so-called black people and Mexicans and Latinos in prison more than any other group of people in the United States? But has anything really changed since back then? Are we really free as America wants us to think? Are you really free as America wants you to think, so-called African Americans, so-called black people? Well, according to Michelle Alexander, not exactly, because her research has led her to conclude that there are more Hebrew people who are incarcerated today than there were enslaved back in 1850, over 150 years ago. So let that sink in for a second. But that's not the only thing. Because did you know that rap music is just a tool that was used to place you and your family and your men into the prisons, which is $1 billion industry, by the way, because even in a secret 1991 meeting, this was some of the things that they talked about and conducted, how they wanted to keep you in prison and keep you enslaved to the system known as America, also known as Egypt. But not only that, because we also see all of the generational curses all the way down, and has it really gotten better is the question, because not only do we have gentrified neighborhoods as well as projects and ghettos and the hood, as well as 99-cent corner stores on every single block and churches on every single corner. And mind you, none of these businesses are owned by your own people, but mind you, these are businesses owned by others who are outside of your own people. I wonder why that is the case. And let's not forget about the educational system that was just set up and designed for you to fail, as well as all of the EBT and the food shortages, poverty, starvation, as well as genocide as we see today, even with the Rwandan genocide, along with many others. And if you think slavery has ended, well, this is simply not the case, because slavery is even practiced today in places such as Haiti and Mauritania, and there's even apartheid in places such as Saudi Arabia, and there are nations such as South Africa that are recovering from their apartheid, which barely ended 20 years ago. And so the question remains, how long? How long must you continue to endure? How long must this continue to go on? How long must we continue to hear "I can't breathe"? How long must we continue to hear about the Eric Garners and the Michael Browns and the Trayvon Martins and the Emmett Tills and the Sandra Blands and the Tamir Rices and the Paul O'Neills? How long must this continue to go on, as well as many others that go on a daily, if not secondly basis? How long must this police brutality go on? How long will this continue to occur in your neighborhoods? How long will this continue to happen in your neighborhoods? And how long until things really start getting better? Because while your government wants you to believe that you're really free and that you really have rights and that you're really a someone, in their eyes you are still 3/5 of a human being. In their eyes you are still worth only 60% compared to everyone else. In their eyes you are worth nothing more than the life of a dog. In their eyes you are worth nothing more than the life of a cow. And that is just the darn truth. But what is the solution? Because you already tried marching and that didn't work. You tried protesting and that didn't work. You tried religion and that didn't work. You tried begging and pleading and singing and hoping and praying to God and Lord and Jesus, but that's still not working. You even tried to blend in, hoping that they would accept you as a human being, but yet to find out that they not only stole and took away your gifts and talents and gave you none of the credit for it, but yet they still regard you as someone who is not even to be regarded, which is why there is a such thing as microaggressions. You even tried to mix in with them and tried to blend cultures together and tried to learn about their cultures, hoping that they would accept you, only to find out that this was the exact opposite. You also tried forgiving and moving on from all of this, hoping that if you just forget about it, that it would take away all of the pain, hurt, and neglect, but that also did not work either. Still, there is nothing. So, what's the solution then? And is there really a way for all of this to change? And if so, what exactly is the solution? So what is the solution then? What is the remedy to all of this? And will you continue to be enslaved and tortured forever? What is the real solution to all of this? Because the good news is there is a solution indeed, and there is a remedy to all of this, and you're going to see exactly what it is. And that solution, and the only solution, is to turn from your wicked ways and return to your Abba, your Father in heaven, Yahuwah, because even 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verses 14 says, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land." 2 Chronicles chapter 6 verses 32 and 33 says, "Moreover concerning the stranger which is not of thy people Israel, but is come from a far country, for thy great name's sake, and thy mighty hand, and thy stretched out arm, if they come and pray in this house, then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the stranger calleth to thee for, that all people of the earth may know thy name, and fear thee, and do with thy people Israel, and may know that this house which I have built is called by thy name." So not only must you humble yourself and pray and seek the Father for forgiveness, but you must also call upon his true name Yahuwah, and then will Yahuwah our Father hear from heaven and will answer you from heaven. And even Leviticus chapter 26 verses 40 through 46 in the 1611 King James Version, where there is no letter J whatsoever, says, "If they shall confess the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass which they trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and that I also have walked contrary unto them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and then they accept of the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember their land. The land also shall be left of them, and shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lie desolate without them, and they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, because they despise my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. And yet for all of that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am Yahuwah their Elohim. But I will for their sakes remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their Elohim. I am Yahuwah. These are the statutes and judgments and laws which Yahuwah made between him and the children of Israel and Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses. And since we know that our father Yahuwah made a covenant with the children of Israel, and we know that that covenant has not been broken, because even our father says that it has not been broken, well then the children of Israel today are still under the covenant with their father. Because here I am in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verses 29 through 31 that says, "But if from thence thou shalt seek Yahuwah thy Elohim, thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul, when thou art in tribulation and all these things are come upon thee, even in the latter days, if thou turn to Yahuwah thy Elohim and shall be obedient unto his voice, for Yahuwah thy Elohim is a merciful Elohim, he will not forsake thee, neither destroy thee, nor forget the covenant of thy fathers, which he sware unto them." And also verses 40 even says, "Thou shalt keep therefore his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee this day, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days upon the earth, which Yahuwah thy Elohim giveth thee forever." You have been lied to for so long, and you have been told that the law is done away with, when this is simply not the case. Because even Deuteronomy chapter 30 verses 1 through 6 say, "And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I've set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither Yahuwah thy Elohim hath driven thee, and shalt return unto Yahuwah thy Elohim, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then Yahuwah thy Elohim will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither Yahuwah thy Elohim hath scattered thee. If any of thine be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from thence will Yahuwah thy Elohim gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. And Yahuwah thy Elohim will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. And Yahuwah thy Elohim will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed, to love Yahuwah thy Elohim with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live." But in order for that to happen, you must fully turn to your Father Yahuwah. You must fully return to the Father Yahuwah in heaven, so that he can forgive you of your sins and get away from all of these paganisms. Get away from the cross. Get away from the church, get away from religion, get away from Christianity, get away from Babylon, and stop calling on pagan titles and false names that cannot save, false titles including Lord and God, and false names including Jesus that cannot and will not save, because Yahuwah and Yahuwah alone saves, as well as returning to the law, statutes, and commandments that Yahuwah has commanded you. And even the Messiah, Yahusha, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus, even says in Matthew chapter 5 verses 17 through 18 that the law is not done away with. He did not come to destroy the law, but rather to fulfill. And just as James chapter 4 verses 9 through 10 says, "It is now time to humble yourself in the sight of Yahuwah, so that he can lift you up by keeping his commandments and reverencing his name, learning his feast days, doing and following his Shabbat, so the seventh day of rest, as well as crying out to your Father Yahuwah for salvation. Then will all of the blessings that are spoken of in Leviticus chapter 26 verses 1 through 13 and Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 1 through 14 come upon you and your children. Then will Yahuwah heal your land. Then will Yahuwah turn away your captivity. And then will Yahuwah establish you as the kings and queens that you really are, as the royalty that you really are." But just remember, our Father gives no esteem to no other name except his own, which is Yahuwah, according to Isaiah chapter 42 verses 8. I mentioned earlier, America will be your final captivity if you choose to return to Yahuwah before Judgment Day. Not only that, but just as Genesis chapter 15 verses 13 through 14 and Acts chapter 7 verses 6 through 7 tell you that you would be in a strange land serving your enemies for 400 years. Well, you originally got here according to your enemies in about 1619 when you first arrived here in Jamestown. If you add another 400 years to that, what do you get? You can do the math on that, but it's sooner than you think. The time to repent is now. The time to return to your Father Yahuwah is now. The time to cry out to your Father Yahuwah and return to Yahuwah and follow his laws, statutes, and commandments now, because soon enough the year of Jubilee will be proclaimed. And on that day of judgment will Yahuwah gather you and all of those who are righteous and following the law, statutes, and commandments. It does not matter your skin color. Will he gather and return to Israel? In fact, Hollywood is even telling you who you are, because even in TV shows such as Good Times and Blackish and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where Carlton has even said, "Let my people go," among many others, they are telling you in front of your face every single day who you are as a person. And even from a New York Times article dated back in 1999, a 95-year-old woman has even embraced her Hebrew culture. In fact, your enemies have even told you that Hebrew is in fact your first language. It is your native tongue and not English. But that's not all, because many others are waking up to who they really are. More and more Hebrew people and more of you are waking up to who you are every single day, including even people in the acting industry such as Brandon T. Jackson, who's awakening to who they are, as well as even people at the Olympics who were even wearing Hebrew fringes and clothing that were even spotted there, along with prominent basketball players such as Amari Stoudemire, as well as many African kings who are also returning to Israel for the return of the Messiah. So we see worldwide that many more people are waking up to who they are and waking up to the truth, and many more of us are waking up to who we are each and every single day. But the question remains, do you know who you are yet, and are you fully awakened to who you are? Because now that we know that African Americans are in fact the real biblical Israelites that scripture talks about, but what about all of the others who were scattered across the four corners of the earth? Who else is considered Israel? Because the 12 tribes chart is in fact false. Other biblical Israelites today include black peoples who are residing in the Caribbean, Central America, and in South American communities, included but not limited to black or Afro Puerto Ricans, Haitians, Jamaicans, Cubans, Dominicans, Mexicans, along with those who are residing in the Afro-Caribbean and Central American countries, not to mention the Native Americans who adopted the Israelite culture during the slavery antebellum period. But there are also blacks in South America who are also biblical Israelites of today, including but not limited to Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Venezuelans, Afro-Guyanese, and many more who are in South America as well as black Europeans who are residing in the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and etc. Along with many tribes in Africa, including Beta Israel, Bantu and Khoisan peoples of southern Africa, the Limba tribe of southern and southeastern Africa, the Igbo people in Nigeria, the Ashanti in Ghana, Nigeria, along with southwestern Africa, as well as the Zulu people in South Africa, the Tutsi and the Watusi people in Rwanda and Burundi, the Maasai peoples of Kenya and Tanzania, as well as the Malagasy Jews who are located in Madagascar, along with many more in many other nations and regions. And for Asia, we have the Black Hebrews who are currently residing in Dimona, Israel, not to mention Batak Israel of Indonesia, the Malabar Jews who are in India, Bain Israel of India, the Bani Manashi or the Shinlung tribe of India, Burma, and Bangladesh, the Mizo tribe of Bangladesh, the Kashmiri people of India, the Canaanites in southwestern India, the Metevo in Sri Lanka, the Andamanese in India and Sri Lanka, as well as the Pashtuns and the Yusufzai in Afghanistan. As well as the Pathans who are residing in present-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, the ancient Kaifeng of China, as well as the Suwa-Taisha and the Shinto culture of Japan, not to mention Oceania as well with the Gogodala and the natives of Polynesia, including those who are residing in Papua New Guinea, but not to mention also the Negritos, who are also known as the Jarawa people in India, the Andamanese who are scattered throughout the Pacific Islands, the Semang peoples of Malaysia, and the Mani who are located in Thailand, as well as the Ata, Agta, and Ati of the Philippines, not to mention the Australian Aboriginals, so to speak. And of course, this is just a non-exhaustive list. There are many more, but hopefully this gives you a better idea and awakens you to the real truth and nothing but the truth, so you can see who the real biblical Israelites are today. What if you are not so-called African American, and what if you are not so-called black? Is there hope for you as well? Is there salvation if you are white? Is there salvation available to you if you are any other race of people or any other group of people not mentioned in this video? The answer to that question, of course there is, because you can be grafted into the law, statutes, and commandments of our Father Yahuwah through the Messiah Yahusha, because remember the coat of many colors, and this is the real good news of the Messiah Yahusha, that the kingdom is available to anyone. It does not matter your color. It does not matter your race. It does not matter your skin pigmentality. That does not matter. If you are following the law, statutes, and commandments of Yahuwah and calling upon his true name, and if you have accepted your true Passover lamb, your perfect Passover lamb, the real Messiah Yahusha, into your heart as your Passover lamb, as the blood of the lamb, then you too can be redeemed from the curse of the law. And that is the good news, that everyone can inherit the kingdom as long as they are following the law, statutes, and commandments and accept Yahusha, the Messiah, into their heart and love Yahuwah with all their heart. And these are the parameters in this commandment that our Father has given us to follow and to keep. The question is, are you willing to do that if you already are not? And the question is, are you ready to accept salvation? Because remember this, Yahuwah is salvation. Isaiah chapter 58 verses 9. Then shalt thou call, and Yahuwah shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. Jeremiah chapter 16 verses 14 through 15. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith Yahuwah, that it shall no more be said, Yahuwah liveth, that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but Yahuwah liveth, that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands whither he had driven them, and I will bring them again into the land that I gave unto their fathers. Baruch chapter 2 verses 31 through 35. And shall know that I am Yahuwah their Elohim, for I will give them an heart and ears to hear, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity, and think upon my name, and return from their stiff neck and from their wicked deeds, for they shall remember the way of their fathers, which sinned before Yahuwah. And I will bring them again into the land which I promised with an oath unto their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they shall be lords of it, and I will increase them, and they shall not be diminished. And I will make an everlasting covenant with them to be their Elohim, and they shall be my people, and I will no more drive my people of Israel out of the land that I have given them. Jeremiah chapter 30 verses 17 through 22. For I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds, saith Yahuwah, because they called thee an outcast, saying, This is Zion, whom no man seeketh after. Thus saith Yahuwah, Behold, I will bring again the captivity of Jacob's tents, and have compassion on his dwelling places, and the city shall be builded upon her own heap, and the palace shall remain after the manner thereof. And out of them shall proceed thanksgiving, and the voice of them that make merry, and I will multiply them, and they shall not be few. I will also esteem them, and they shall not be small. Their children also shall be as aforetime, and their congregation shall be established before me, and I will punish all that oppress them. And their nobles shall be of themselves, and their governor shall proceed from the midst of them, and I will cause him to draw near, and he shall approach unto me. For who is this that engaged his heart to approach unto me, saith Yahuwah? And ye shall be my people, and I will be your Elohim. Isaiah chapter 11 verses 11 through 16. And it shall come to pass in that day that Yahuwah shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. But they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philippines toward the west. They shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. And Yahuwah shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river, and shall smite it in the seven streams, and make men go over dry shod. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, like as it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt. Joel chapter 3 verses 1 through 2. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. Ezekiel 37:12 through 14. Therefore prophesy and say unto them, Thus saith Yahuwah Elohim, Behold, O my people, I will open your graves, and cause you to come out of your graves, and bring you into the land of Israel. And ye shall know that I am Yahuwah, when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up out of your graves, and shall put my spirit in you, and ye shall live, and I shall place you in your own land. Then shall ye know that I Yahuwah have spoken it, and have performed it, saith Yahuwah. And so I hope that this video has been very helpful unto you, and I hope this video has proven truth to you and revealed the truth and nothing but the truth to you. But I also hope that from this video you really start to seek Yahuwah, our true Father, and his true Son, Yahusha, if you're already not. Because now that you know who you are, just know that Israel, Yashra'al, our redemption, draweth nigh, and now is the time to rise, O Israel. This is Truth Unveiled here, saying peace, love, and as always, shalom.